Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, I have really been enjoying this year's 2017 RPG a Day questions. I've been enjoying it more than I thought I was going to. And I thought what was going to happen is I was going to answer the questions, maybe put a little bit of thought into them, listen to your responses, kind of think about what you said, maybe have my thinking challenged in some way, away with some different perspectives, and that's all happened. However, the other thing that's happened is that these questions, while on the surface they seem really kind of simple and you can answer them in a really kind of rote manner, just give some off the cuff responses. Yes, I like this kind of game. I like this particular game. This is the one that's on my shelf the longest. All that kind of stuff. What I found is that if you're willing to kind of look a little bit below the surface, do some reflecting, that the questions can be very thought provoking. And so, at least in my case, they've been having me think a little bit more about what I like in games, what I don't like in games, why. And have me, challenge some beliefs about myself as a person to a certain extent. Now, maybe this is a perfect storm because during this same time for the last year, I've been looking at different games, and now I'm just kind of getting a bunch of a variety of games that are way outside my comfort zone or experience that I've been looking at and reading in games, including things like Tech Noir, which I will get to in this video. I have to make a separate video about that game, but so maybe it's this perfect storm where I'm really kind of looking at all these different systems and seeing what I like, what I don't like, why I like what I don't like. I talked about in the video, the actual RPG a Day video I made yesterday, about reasons for maybe liking rules like games a little bit more is because I prefer to, or I'm more comfortable once I have system mastery. I feel comfortable playing a game, rules as written, or to be honest with you, anyway, even if I'm tweaking it, once I really understand it, the ins and outs of it. And I noticed a couple things, but one of the things I'm going to talk about today, or the thing I'll talk about today, is I seem to like to walk this tightrope between a preference for kind of like an abstract representation or interpretation on one side, but at the same time, I like to have an explicit set of instructions, a real concrete set of parameters on the other side. I want to know what I'm doing. I want to know exactly how the procedures work. I want to know what the protocols are, what we're supposed to do, and I also like to know why. I don't want to know just know what the instructions are. I want to know what we're trying to achieve. And I didn't have the greatest day at work yesterday, and the reason was I had this kind of I banged heads a little bit with a manager of mine, and what the real issue for me was that got me upset was they didn't give me a very clear set of instructions. And when I asked for the clear set of instructions, they really were being kind of wishy-washy. And not only were they not giving me a clear set of instructions, they weren't really telling exactly what they wanted, why they wanted it, what they wanted the final outcome to look like. They weren't being very specific, and that drives me mad. Now I understand that that's we'll say, for the lack of a better word, this is a shortcoming or character defect of mine that I need to work on. But we're gonna go with this and just say that's part of my personality. That's part of what makes me tick. And I realized, I apply the same thing to role-playing games. I like to know what the rules are. I like to know exactly what I'm supposed to do in all these situations, why I'm supposed to do it, what is the effect we're looking for. Once I have that kind of rationale and I understand the procedures, that kind of structure sets me free, both in real life and in role-playing games. So then when unexpected situations come up, unforeseen, just something's a little odd, I can work within that framework and be a bit of a maverick or be creative and still get the desired effect. Or if I'm looking to tweak the effect a little bit, I understand how to do that because I understand how the engine works. So it's kind of weird. I'm walking that little tightrope. I don't know if you can relate to this, where I really enjoy the abstract representation, but I want this concrete set of instructions, this concrete framework. And it's funny, on either side, I don't like it. If it leans too much towards one side, I'll take a game like Tech Noir, which does not lean too much towards one side, but in the absence of the rules that make this game work, it could turn very easily into a party game, which I don't particularly like. And the idea is we're going to, I'm probably coming up with the wrong term, but the idea is we're going to collaboratively tell this story in the absence of any real rules. And I'm going to say something, and then you're going to say something, or it's going to build on it, like a kind of like head, body, legs, narratively. That after a while drives me nuts because there's no real framework for what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what are the rules, how do we resolve conflict in an arbitrary manner, all that kind of stuff. I prefer that. So I don't like when there's no concrete rules. That's my preference. I'm not saying that's bad. There's a certain level of improv that I no longer like. However, on the other side of the spectrum, when things are too codified, and they get too complicated. Maybe complicated is not the right word, but too prescriptive in terms of, okay, well, you've done this, you roll this number of dice or whatever, however you manage to adjudicate something, and you have to look up on tables and charts and graphs, well, like, what exactly happens? And maybe you're knocked back 5 feet, and the guy's hitting the leg, and he suffers a movement rate of this, and something else happens. I'm just making this stuff up, You get the idea. There's a point where it just turns into a tactical exercise and is more like chess, and it's no longer, to me, a creative endeavor. And, I'm not saying that's bad either, but there's a point where I no longer like that. I kind of like this middle ground. And maybe it's just not just middle ground. It's just the kind of balance I like. In what areas do I want structure, and what areas do I not want structure? And I was thinking about it. We were doing this way back in the early 80s. Maybe you were doing it in the mid to late 70s if you've been around longer than I have. We played things like the older versions of Dungeons and Dragons. And you had these die rolls, and okay, well, you've done 6 points of damage, or you failed this dexterity check, and so maybe you didn't make it up this tree, or whatever it was, or you're a thief and you've successfully picked this lock, or whatever happens. There I am rolling all these dice, right? But what does that look like? You can narrate it in a really boring manner, and that gets boring, or you can do what a lot of good game masters did, and you start to become very creative with this. At least my culture of play was that the game master did all that. As time went on, I've recently, as I've talked about in my videos, become more comfortable and have enjoyed growing and kind of getting beyond my hesitation and my misgivings about shifting that locus of control into the player's hands, where I'm going to narrate my successes. But even so, I enjoy doing this in a really narrative and creative manner. I enjoy playing with other players that do that. The games I've had recently in Ubiquity, both in Hollow Earth Expedition and in All for One Regime Diabolique, where we're all kind of riffing off each other and narrating things creatively. That's been a hoot. I love that. So it doesn't matter what the game is so much, but as long as the system is going to enforce and allow that. This game Tech Noir, which, like I said, I have to do a video on. It's really interesting. There's parts of this that seem very, very wishy-washy. In other words, you're having die rolls, but instead of like numbers, you're doing things like forcing adjectives on one another, and you're using verbs, and it's become this really kind of fuzzy thing. I'm first looking at it like, man, this is really kind of strange. This is way outside my comfort zone. However, in some ways, this game is much more concrete, and the parameters are much more clear and laid out than in something like old school D&D. And what I mean by that, and I don't want to ruin too much or go too much into the review of that game, but you make a die roll. The results, you narrate the results in a way that's pretty abstract, but it involves applying adjectives to somebody else. Now, that abstract representation of what just happened, via the game mechanics, well, then there's a codified way to translate that abstract representation of the way the world is now to the next conflict and the next die roll. So it's not just that somebody's hurt. This actually has a mechanical implication into the next conflict and perhaps the next dice rolls. So there is, once again, this kind of concrete set of parameters. This is how this is going to work. Then how you operate within it, as long as you're not violating any of the other parameters of this game, which is more about genre enforcement, which, once again, that's not what this video is about. Then it's pretty much up to this abstract and creative narration, which I really like. So I'm really looking forward to really diving into games like Fate, seeing what that's more about. I get Fudge, but Fate, it's a different child or different cousin of that, and things like Powered by the Apocalypse, just to see like how different games handle it, and see what my reactions are. And also looking at some other games that are completely different and more complex in some ways. So I found, as I'm looking at these thought-provoking questions, which seem very simple on the surface, about game preferences from RPG a day, and as I'm looking at other games, as I'm playing some new games, that they're much more thought-provoking. I'm looking, if I take the time, and look below the surface, I find out a lot more about myself and my preferences. It's not just, oh, I like rules light, or oh, I like to play my character, or oh, I kind of like simulationism and things to be a little bit more realistic, or what level of heroism do I like. There's a lot more, and so I don't know if you can relate to this at all, but that's just something that kind of occurred to me. So, if you're participating in RPG a day, or if you're just playing other games, I would invite you to kind of don't be so flippant about answers if you have been. kind of take a look below the surface and see what makes you tick. If you don't like something, why don't you like something? If you find yourself gravitating towards something, why are you gravitating towards that? I find that to be very instructive and fun. So I don't know if this made any sense to you, but I'm enjoying it. So have a good one.